Hi, all. This is Ann Lund coming to you from Haunted and Waiting on the Eye Opener Society podcast. First of all, as always, I want to thank Gary for having me on this podcast. He's always been very welcoming, and I'm so excited to share my stories and my passion, which are the haunted and anything paranormal that has to do with ghosts. So, for today's topics, we are going to talk about something called pareidolia and ghosts. And I'm going to add a little scientific explanation to what a pareidolia is. So, in brief, there are moments when our brain does something pretty extraordinary and sometimes unsettling. So, a face may appear in a fog or a cloud, or a figure forms in a shadow. Sometimes you might hear a voice in the background that no one else seems to hear. And science sometimes calls these pareidolias, and it's the mind's tendency to perceive a meaningful pattern in something that maybe is not so meaningful. So, as an example, I always like to make these a little bit personal. This happened just a few days ago. I'm having a situation in my house with my dog, apparently seeing things running around the house barking that I don't seem to see or perceive. And in essence, it kind of looks like she's following somebody or communicating with something I can't see. So the other day, I took her into the backyard and it was nighttime and it was very cold and she was breathing and, smoke or mist was coming out of her mouth because it was so cold. And in that mist, under a light that we have on a tree, I distinctively saw the shape of a person and she was barking, and this is why the mist was coming out of her mouth. So I just want you to picture this. She's barking. There's mist coming out of her mouth from the cold, and in that mist, I saw a figure of a person as if the person was bent over trying to pet her. Um, I do post these videos somewhat on TikTok. If you want to reach out, I can give you that handle, but it's not a paranormal site, so I don't want to really share that here. But it was very weird, and it's what gave me the idea to write or to talk about pareidolias. So, if you've already followed my blog, look for my blog and follow it. Hauntedandwaiting.blog. I'll share the story, the full story there about the dog in the mist there. Okay, and I also write about other true experiences with paranormal. But let's get back to pareidolias for today. Here's the problem. Some of the most famous ghost sightings and paranormal photographs in history will fit a pareidolia, and yet not well enough to be dismissed. So when perception in the environment and memory and expectation overlap, pareidolias become something more than a trick of the brain, and somewhat of a threshold. So let me start off by talking about what the scientific explanation will say about pareidolias. Gotta love the science people, right? So scientifically, um, it's well documented. So I'm going to put it out there. It's a neurological phenomenon. It's got an explanation. And basically, the human brain is evolved to prioritize patterns of recognition. So when something doesn't make sense, our brain will naturally form a face or put a voice to what we're seeing because it's trying to fill in the missing spaces as to what could have been danger or what could be danger. Okay. And it's kind of the theory of survival of the fittest. The ancestors who had this skill were more likely to survive and pass on their genes. And then we get that gene. So, our ancestor could have been in the woods somewhere and a bear might have been watching them through the trees. They look, they see a pattern. They go, oh, it's a bear. And it was a bear. They survived the attack because they were able to make that pattern. I think you get the idea. So that's why they think we have this skill. It kind of was passed down. Okay. So neurologically, this like a face, actively appears, letting us know that there's somebody watching us. The brain fills in these gaps, um, and so on and so forth. Okay. But it's a little bit annoying, and I'll tell you why. It's hypersensitive in a lot of people. And so I used to have a Facebook group and I had to start cutting posts off. So, for instance, in marble, you might see the pattern of a face and they'll say, oh, it looks like my grandmother. Okay. Or you make a piece of toast and you say, oh, well, that looks like my dog. Okay. I kind of don't like those pareidolias and they somewhat annoy me, and I was taking them off. I prefer the pareidolias where it sort of kind of appears as if it's a living thing. So you'll see people commenting on, oh, it's just a pareidolia. That's most of the time what they mean by it, but there's times when it's a little bit more than that. Okay, so let's go into some actual stories that were documented. I'm going to start with my first one. It's the Brown Lady of Raham Hall. This came around in the 1930s. It's one of Britain's most famous ghost stories. Gotta love Britain. And it's believed to be the spirit of a woman named Lady Dorothy Walpole. And the legend here says that her husband thought she was cheating on him and actually took her, sealed her up in an attic or a top floor, refused to let her out. She lived up there apparently for several years. And this was in the 1700s. I guess you were allowed to do that. I don't know. She eventually died, they think, of smallpox. But in this hall, okay, there are so many photographs that were taken of this woman. Okay, it's one of the most analyzed ghost photographs. Honestly, that it'll always come up. If you just put it in, you'll see it. I will link the story in my blog to other blog posts if you're interested in that. But basically, she's just seen walking down a staircase. Skeptics will tell you it's a pareidolia. You know, they'll say it's the shadows aligning with the banisters and the light bleed with a long exposure. If you like Ozzy Osbourne and you watch the Osbournes Want to Believe, Ozzy was constantly kind of edging Jack, his son, with it's a double exposure. So this maybe could have been a double exposure. I don't know. But here's where science is going to hesitate. This photograph was examined multiple times, probably hundreds, if not thousands of times. And they've been able to prove that was not manipulated in any way. The other thing about it is multiple witnesses have described seeing the same person over decades, same person. So how it could just show up in a photograph, that's kind of odd. And the figure also is proportional, you know, it's in movement. So, you know, it's not like the little face in the cloud. This is proportional. This is like as if she was actually there on the steps. So, and there's like no explanation how that happened. So, pretty credible. So, and a pareidolia does not explain a recognition. It doesn't explain why so many people can recognize the same exact thing for decades. So, that's that. So let's talk about what faces appear where they shouldn't. And we're going to go to the Freddie Jackson Squadron photograph. This is in the early 1900s. This is a great photograph. If you haven't, again, I'll link that to my blog. But so he was apparently Freddie Jackson was an airman, and he had passed away, obviously. And his squadron had taken this picture together, and he's in there. He's in there, even though he had died. A few days earlier, I believe they said it was a few days earlier, but he's in there. It's clear. You can look at that picture and then you could see an actual picture of what he actually looked like in life. And it's the same person, but the picture was documented as having been taken days later. So skepticals, gotta love the scientists, will explain this again. A double exposure, could say a pareidolia, but I don't know. The face again was recognized by his airmen friends. It matched his facial expressions, features exactly, and there was no second negative ever found. So the chance of it being a double exposure, I don't know. I don't know. So that's that one. So we spoke about visual pareidolias. That's when you see something that maybe is not there. But let's talk about auditory pareidolias. So an auditory pareidolia, also known as a phantom voice, occurs when the brain finds speech patterns and random noises. This typically happens when there's like a fan going in the background, an air conditioner, or just some kind of consistent white noise. And people will claim that they hear a sound through that. Now, this used to happen to me at night. We have a heater that runs with a fan. And when it would play off, I could swear I heard music in the background. I could swear I heard music, people talking. It sounded almost like there was a party going on. It was very bizarre. I was the only one able to hear it. In my own sense of being psychic, I think I have a little bit of clairaudience going on because I tend to hear things other people don't. So that's an auditory pareidolia, or they could say it's an auditory pareidolia. My mind is making sense of a sound. Again, the ancestors. This could have helped us if, you hear rustling in the bushes and there's a tiger there, you would survive that. So that's how scientists explain it. But historically, these have been documented. So the ancient temples all across the world have echo chambers, and they've specifically built these chambers. There's a bunch of them in Europe, a few in Italy that I've been to, that they were built in such a way so that you could hear divine speech. They were built to attract a speech that you couldn't hear otherwise. So it was really believed at that time that the dead did try to speak to us. Soldiers under stress have reported hearing their names, okay, or loved ones coming through under really terrible times, okay. That's another odd one that happens. Science, again, will explain it, but then again, this is when you struggle. Multiple people hear the same phrase, the same sentence, okay, at the same time, or voices that are responsive. So you speak back to the voice, it answers you, or you ask a question and it answers you. Or what about the times there are multiple recordings in the same area, but at different times, and the same voice comes through with the same message? All documented cases. You can probably research yourself and you'll see. I know my husband and I, one time, we consistently heard, it happened 2 or 3 times, the voice saying, "Get out." And we would hear it at the same time in the house that we're in right now, years ago. So, I mean, yeah, maybe my mind made it up to sound like that, but how did his mind make it up to sound exactly the same on multiple occasions? So let's talk now. We're going to go back to visual and we're going to talk about mirrors, windows, and reflective things, which they call triggers. I'm going to do another podcast on scrying. So scrying is when you see something, again, it's not a pattern, but you'll look in a reflective surface and you kind of see something in that. But I put it under an auditory, visual pareidolia because it could kind of be that. So mirrors are consistently used in hauntings or in describing hauntings, and it's believed that they're pareidolia amplifiers. So in low light, the brain might struggle to see a reflection clearly, and it could distort things and make it seem like, let's say, a face. So this matters because mirrors appear constantly in ghost reports. So the Myrtles plantation, Louisiana, the children's hands on the Myrtles appear in the mirror. Even in Disney, if you go to Disney, the Haunted Mansion, every mirror in the Haunted Mansion has a ghost in it. My own stories with mirrors, I went to Arizona many times, and there's a haunted city called Jerome. If anybody's ever been to Arizona or been to Jerome, you're going to know it's ghost town. It's very haunted, but there is an asylum there. And I have captured pictures of an Indian woman in the mirrors and in the glass casings that are in the hallway. I've captured that. I saw them, and there was nobody there with me, but you can clearly see her face there. So it happened to me also at the 1776 house here in New York State, where I had a wine glass and I captured the picture of a woman in the wine glass, another area known to be haunted. So these things happen a lot of times in areas that are known to be haunted. So it's not your typical mirror. It'll be like in a house that's known to have a history. So let's talk about the Borley Rectory in England. There's a figure that's said to haunt the mirrors and the windows in this rectory. And this story is kind of sad. It happened in the 1700s. This story was that a nun had fallen in love with a monk and was found. And as punishment, she was sealed into the walls of the rectory. Okay, and she died in the walls. And after that, she began to haunt the building. So, and her image would come out in the mirrors and in the windows of this rectory many times. You can look for pictures. It's pretty unsettling. But the critics, again, will say that this is pareidolia. Okay, but in the 1930s, a famous investigator, Henry Price, if you don't know him, look him up, conducted multiple seances there and was able to communicate with this said ghost. I'll link his story into the blog. But he was able to come up with a lot of information about this woman that no one else really knew. So the fact that she's appearing in windows, in mirrors, kind of odd. And again, several sightings, several sightings. So let's go on to the next pareidolia because we've done visual, we've done audio, and we're going to do something called palpatory. Apologies if you heard the phone ring, another bizarre situation. Again, my phone's been acting up, but let me move on with what's called a palpatory pareidolia. So we've talked about visual, we've talked about auditory, now we're going to talk about touch. And this again refers to the brain's tendency to interpret a touch, such as feeling a hand brush past you, maybe pressure on the skin, or maybe like feeling somebody behind you, some kind of like touch. These are common. So you know what cold spots are reported in castles, historic homes. It's when you feel like a cold coming through, um, and or just a touch. So a lot of times, a lot of stories documented about people feeling hands on them, hands on their shoulder, hands on their head, on their clothing, a tug on their hair. Again, it's been explained neurologically, but and it seems to occur under heightened emotional states or fatigue. Again, if we go back to the situation with the Borley Rectory, with this nun that was sealed up in the walls, she was also known to walk around tugging at clothing. So that was a common thing, that you'd be somewhere in the rectory and she would tug your clothing. So, so that's interesting. All right, so let's move on basically to my criticism of the scientific community, which has consistently, even within friends and family, called me crazy. Um, but let's just criticize them a little bit. Pareidolia may explain why a person might notice a face or a voice or feel something when nothing is there. It might explain that. It can also explain how the brain fills in those gaps. Okay. But what it does not do was it does not explain the origin, the consistency, or the correlation to a place, a time, or just a story. When the tug correlates to a story, or the face correlates to an actual person that lived in the house, or the sentence that you hear correlates to an actual situation that occurred in a haunted castle, that's a little bit too much for me to place on science. It just doesn't explain it. And how someone who has no knowledge of a given place in history can be spot on when hearing said name or seeing said face. Okay. And, only the serious paranormal researchers will look into this. Scientific community does not. It dismisses it. So without a baseline control, how can you say what it actually is? So, I am going to do in the future, two other, they're not pareidolias, they fall under phantom smells and phantom tastes. But, look forward to that one. That's going to come in the future. But in closing, pareidolia may not be evidence of ghosts, but it may be a mechanism that allows us to perceive across a threshold. Maybe it softens our brain's filter. You know what I say about those filters? Okay. We have been taught not to pay attention to these things. So maybe it softens that a little bit. Maybe it invites us to put meaning into something that's a little bit ambiguous. And in that, it could open a door. So if ghosts are real, pareidolia may be how we notice them. It just may be. Either explanation is unsettling, but I just want to throw it out there. It could be something that's actual way of us to communicate or to perceive what's unperceivable otherwise. So thank you for listening thus far, and please follow Gary's blog, podcast, Haunted and Waiting, that I'm on, as well as his Eye Opener Society. He's on all the venues. He's got other podcasters there as well. He has a Sunset Childs, he has Elaine's Oracle, and he does his own meditations. So please, if you don't, give him a follow. And again, you can find me on hauntedandwaiting.blog, and I hope to see you somewhere. Thank you.